Hello and welcome to Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. I am your host, JP John Poz from the two-man power trip of wrestling. And of course, joining me is the star of the show, the former WCW and ECW World Tag Team Champion, one of the greatest minds and bookers ever in the history of wrestling, the man behind the NWO, the man behind WCW's 83 Weeks of Dominance. He is the Games Master, the Taskmaster, the devil himself, Kevin Sullivan. Kevin, how are you doing today, sir?
Great, John. How you been, my friend?
Doing very good. Cannot complain at all. I know you were enjoying Tampa.
Yeah, I was in Tampa. Then I went to Fort Lauderdale for a few extra days. So it was a nice trip.
Nice. Very cool. Saw some family, right? Very
Yes,
nice.
the family was very nice.
Now, were you ever living down there, like permanent residence in Florida for a while, right?
I had between Daytona. I originally moved to, when I first got in the business, I moved to Orlando for a short period, but I lived between the Keys and Daytona for 44 years, and 3/4 of them I lived in both places.
Wow.
You know,
Damn.
they're 350 miles apart. So I was on the West Coast and the East Coast. So it was nice.
Crazy that you ever moved out of Florida. They say once you get there, you don't want to leave.
Well, what happened was we got mandated to have sewers. And to me, if you're mandated by the government to have sewers, they should be the ones paying for it. I had a unique piece of property. I owned an acre down there, and that's like unheard of. I had 1,100 square foot guest house, and you had to pay. I would have had to pay for 3 septic tanks, another drop tank, and this is when I had the gym. I would have had to put and I had just 8 years prior to that put in a whole septic tank down there, and over a 20-year period, it was going to cost me like $300,000 on taxes with that.
Oh my God. What?
Yeah. The taxes down there are the highest in Florida.
Damn, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't think the taxes were that bad in Florida, but man, that's crazy.
Not in a lot of Florida, but in the Keys, because the sewer thing, you know what I mean? And there was only 5,000 more buildable lots when I lived there. And you had to apply to get a permit. And sometimes it took 3 to 4 years. So your money sat there in escrow. So I was lucky I got in at the right time and got out at the right time.
And you mentioned to me before about Tampa. I didn't realize that. A lot of thunder and lightning in Tampa. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, supposedly the lightning capital of the world. I mean, every afternoon it would rain, but only for like 20 minutes, but it would pour buckets. It would get black. Sky would get dark, lightning all around. Yeah. Well, the hockey team is the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Oh, true. Yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So obviously WrestleMania had some bad weather. They felt that. Very shocking to happen to WWE at WrestleMania.
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, nothing like that's ever happened to them. They've had good luck up until that point.
So, and they've ran a ton of outside shows, really.
Yeah, a ton.
I think the last one I can recall, I think it was like 86 when they ran Puerto Rico or something. Wasn't Hogan and Stud in the main event? Wasn't it like the ring they could barely move and it was sliding away? That might be the last one I could think of.
It might have been. I don't recall that, but it could have been.
Crazy, though, to have that happen in their first match back, really, or first event back, really, in front of fans. So horrible luck to start off the show.
Right.
Thank God they don't pay a pay-per-view where where, you know what I mean? They'd probably have to cut a bunch of matches to make sure it ends on time. Thank God they didn't have to deal with that anymore.
Yeah, and the other thing was, usually half the audience came from outside the country.
Yep.
So they lost on that too. So
Yeah, both nights sold out, 25,000 each,
right.
both nights, but no international fans. And usually you add those international fans, you're looking at 60,000 people, 70,000 people, 80,000. So, I mean,
Exactly. I saw a report one time. I think it was the year they ran Dallas that 61 or 64% were from outside the country.
wow, damn,
Pretty
that's
amazing. Yeah.
yeah. They say, who knows if it's true? 100,000 people were there that day. Who knows
Yeah.
if that's true?
Well, even if it wasn't true, it was damn close.
Yeah. Well, a ton of humanity there. It is crazy to think that, like, you don't have the international travel for a while now. It just, man, like, crazy how much life has changed, and even for WB, how much things have changed. I mean, they released like 10 guys today
Really?
during the pandemic. Yeah,
Really? Wow.
Samoa Joe is the biggest name I saw that got released.
Wow.
Then Peyton Royce, who's a big name, Chelsea Green, Billy Kay, a bunch of the girls that they were, Mickey James, a bunch of the big names were released.
Yeah. I think, we've talked about this before. Now that they're a public company, the only thing that matters is the bottom line. You know what I mean? They don't see things in the long range. They see what the stocks are going to be for their stockholders, and they've gone down significantly over the last year and a half.
Do you think that when they cut guys like that, they're thinking about bringing in a big money player, like re-signing Lesnar or re-signing Rousey? You think that plays a part, or it's all money driven?
I think it plays a part because where that money is going to come from, it's got to come from a budget, and whatever they're paying Brock, they're probably paying at least 10 other people or 15 other people what they pay him. So it's a bottom line thing because of it being a corporate company.
When you were the booker of WCW, did you play a role in like talent and who's coming in and who was going out, or no?
Guys coming in, I would suggest. Guys going out, no. That was a whole different thing. And usually that was because negotiation of contracts that guys maybe overpriced themselves because the company was doing so good. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So
let's
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, let's say the company's doing so good, and maybe you want to add in a big name. Do you say like, yes, that'd be good, or do you say maybe cheaper, or do you say anything about that?
I would never say anything about anybody's money because that's not my thing. I mean, I'm still one of the guys. I think they should be paid accordingly. If they ask me, is this guy worth $1 million? I'd say, well, that's up to you to make that decision. But most of the guys that they asked that question, yeah, were. So, and you got to remember how hot we were at the time. So,
Let's say it's 94 or something. Hogan's already there. Savage is available. And they say, hey, we can get Savage. Are you saying, yes, we got to get him?
yes, absolutely, because he's such a great talent. Absolutely.
Somebody had mentioned to me the other day, and I just thought it was so funny. It's so true. Somebody didn't know much about wrestling. They always said, like, man, I remember Macho Man from all the Slim Jim commercials and talking about how big he was outside of wrestling. I was like, yeah, that is true. So many people still to this day, Slim Jim is associated with Macho Man.
And the thing was when he left and came to us, he brought a $500,000 deal with him. So that was a huge plus, right?
Yeah.
And you see him on TV all day long on that commercial. So, and Randy was one of a kind. I've gotten to appreciate his work and his interviews so much in the last few years. I say to myself, I knew he was great, but I didn't realize how exceptional he was.
Definitely, easily one of the all-time greats. And today's episode will focus in on him being a referee. He'll be the special guest referee for the main event, which is a different position for the Macho Man.
Your report to that? Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. So, yeah, Randy was terrific.
And I was saying that he's going to be the special guest referee, which is an interesting position for him to be in.
Yes, very interesting, huh? Because at this period, as people are starting to see more stuff going on behind the scenes, they realize the problem that Hogan and Randy had for years, you know?
Yep. Somebody had mentioned that to me today. Like, was that a rib on Savage that Hogan would always kind of, even WrestleMania 4, like he had to be a part of Savage winning at the end? Like, was that always like something between them?
Yep, I think so. Too often to be a coincidence. So you think?
It was always the case.
It reminded me of the great comic Charlie Brown, where Lucy's holding the football and says, "Don't worry, I won't move it on you this time." They did that for 50 years, right?
Yeah, because even last week when we were talking about Spring Stampede 98, Savage gets the big win. He beats Sting for the title. And then what happens the next night? Hogan beats him for the WCW title. It's another Lucy thing with him.
Right, right.
So today's episode will be a WCW Spring Stampede 1999, what a lot of people say is the last great WCW pay-per-view. This got critical acclaim just as far as a ton of good matches and good action. WCW Spring Stampede 99, April 11th, 1999, from Tacoma, Washington at the Tacoma Dome. Attendance was 17,690. Tagline, the good, the bad, the showdown. Pay-per-view buys 255,000. What do you think about that?
Kevin was the booker at the time. I was with him as his assistant or whatever he needed. But we always hear the negatives about Kevin. He did a remarkable job when he took over.
What do you think about him as a booker overall? Do you think like you are, definitely you like to book heat. You like to, get a lot of the bad guys, quote unquote, the heels over. What would you kind of think of Kevin as a booker?
He had the same philosophy. And Kevin knew how to get heat. I heard some people say he didn't have that many moves, right? There's only been one guy selected to the Baseball Hall of Fame unanimously, and that's Rivera, right?
Yep.
He had one pitch.
True.
Yeah. Kevin.
And it's funny, Hogan didn't have a lot of moves either. He's he's one of the best.
Yeah. And Kevin, if he kept the job, and he would have grown into it magnificently. Kevin had so many outside ventures at the end. He had movies and other things. So he didn't get fired, he went to them and said, I'm going to take a break and I want Kevin to take over. But if this was Kevin's pay-per-view.
With him as a booker, what is he like relying on you for? Does he want you to kind of set him up, or are you just kind of going over the details after he lays out the show?
Him and I, we became really close because he had me, he had Mike Graham, Bob Mole, and we would be in the office. Actually, Kevin got us out of the office into a hotel so we could get work done. And Kevin would ask me what I thought about things. He would ask Mike Graham for finishes. He surrounded him. Mike Graham was one of the greatest finish men in the business, next to his father. So Kevin was smart on people he chose to bring in. And Kevin was very, very well liked in the dressing room backstage. Especially the Hispanic boys love Kevin. Kevin is a cool dude. Great guy to have. I told you this before. You can talk art to Kevin. You can talk sports to Kevin. You can talk wine. I can't talk it on his level, but he can. He's just an all-around cowboy.
With him and him being so close to the boys, does that make it weird, like for the booker? I know you said you kind of like a player's coach yourself, but is that weird to be that close to the boys and be a booker?
For some people, it is very difficult. But for Kevin, first of all, when he walks in the room, he's somebody. Kevin has this magnetic personality. And he got a lot out of guys because everybody wanted to work for Kevin because he made them feel good. I can remember when guys become back under the curtain. And like Rey Mysterio walked by and Hoovy, he'd give them both a pat like you do in football in the ass. And thumbs up, guys. He appreciated the guys' performances. He was very diplomatic in giving out finishes. If it was ever a question, I gave a finish. I said this is what Kevin wants. If you want to talk to him, he's in his room. Go ahead. And 90% of them would say, "Well, okay, that's fine." And if they did go in there, it was just to tweak something. Maybe they wanted a little more time. And other than that, I never saw any problems that he had backstage.
Do you think he was a little intimidating, maybe, to some of the boys? I mean, he's a massive guy, known as one of the toughest and strongest guys in the business, too. So was he intimidating, you think, at all?
Oh, I used to train with Kevin, and at my strongest, I squatted 800 pounds. Kevin was doing back work on Nautilus equipment with 750. I've never seen anybody come close to that. I could maybe do, and I'm talking about in my best, he was getting 405 is 4 plates. He would get 15 reps. I may get 7 with 315. He was really an imposing guy. And he never came across as a bully when he became the boss. And I think that had a lot to say about Kevin's character. I know some people think that maybe he held people down, but he really didn't, because it goes back to explain like they're probably doing right now, the WWE, explain why you're paying that guy so much money and they're not working that much. It's not in their contract. Well, because there's other guys that are better. And Kevin would try, when I say better paychecks, Kevin would explain it to them in the coldest and truest fact. Hey, I get a report why I'm doing this. And if I do it too often, my neck is on the line too. You're not going to lose your job. I can't remember anybody that was let go by Kevin unless their contract ran out and the contract negotiations failed.
What do you think were like his credentials to become a booker? What did he do as far as I know, obviously be a world champion and be a great athlete and everything, but what kind of made him want to be a booker or made Bischoff and yourself think he could be the booker?
Kevin had great ideas. They tried to kill Kevin off when he first got there, whether it was intentional or not intentional. I happen to have my own thoughts on it, and I'll keep them to myself. But they gave him Vinny Vegas, right? And
Yep.
they had Diamond Dallas Page, who hadn't found himself yet, be his mouthpiece. Then they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on that backdrop for the disaster of Oz. They took a 7-foot guy who had just won Mr. Georgia, made his hair gray, put a cone on his head, and had me walk to the ring with a wizard mask on. And Janie Ingalls as Dorothy. I mean, Kevin had to dig himself out of a hole. And the other thing was, Kevin got to stand and watch outside the ring some of the greatest performers in the history of our business. He got to see Sean every night. He got to see Scott up close working with Sean. He got to see Austin. He got to see them all from ringside, and Kevin absorbed everything. Kevin absorbed everything, and he had such a personality. Everybody wanted to have a beer with Kevin. And he had his statement, it's true. Guys wanted to be like Kevin, and girls wanted to be with Kevin. So Kevin had it, but he overcame a lot of bad shit that I don't think I've ever seen anybody dig himself out of that kind of hole in my life.
So with Kevin, obviously he beats Goldberg and ends the undefeated streak. And like you said, maybe took a lot of slack that he maybe shouldn't have gotten for that and the finger poke of doom and all that stuff.
Like I said, he was a good soldier. He never revealed his side of the story. And that takes a lot of guts, even after all these years. But Kevin smiled all the way to the bank.
True. Now, this pay-per-view, Spring Stampede 1999, is the first one with that alien-like WCW logo. Did you care for this weird new logo that they had?
No. They did all these brand, we hired a branding company that actually branded the Raiders. And at the time, the Raiders, I don't think they still are, but I bet you they're in the top 5, were the number one selling jerseys and jackets and hats. And I think the company they hired wanted to get completely away from what we had and try to get into the futuristic, where it looked like, wow, this is something. Again, a lot of money was spent. I don't think they got their money's worth.
Definitely not. I hated this logo. I don't even know how to describe it, like a space futuristic weirdo logo. I mean, it's probably not as bad as the WWE version where they made that red weird WCW logo, but this is pretty bad.
Yeah, and to me it looked like a B science fiction movie from the 50s. You know, Ed Wood, the plan from Planet Nine from outer space. That's what it reminded me. It was. I hated it.
Weird.
Yeah.
As far as Janie Engel, what was she? She was Bischoff's assistant, or what was her role?
Janie Engel was Eric's assistant. She was my assistant. Janie knew more about the wrestling business than 90% of the guys in it. She grew up around the wrestling business. I'm not sure if it was Lubbock. I'm almost positive it was Lubbock. She started there for the funk, selling tickets when she was about 16 years old. So she had been around the wrestling business forever. She was a very smart girl.
Didn't realize she was in the business for that long. Wow, that's crazy.
Hmm.
And I know Bischoff has a lot of good things to say about her. I know he liked her.
Oh, I don't. If you didn't like Janie Ingalls, you weren't a human being.
And she would travel with you guys, or she just strictly office?
Sometimes she would travel to towns, pay-per-views, and clashes in major uh, towns because Eric wanted her there for what for whatever he needed, or if he needed somebody to call the travel agency, she would do that. We had our own in-house travel agency where I think Janie ran that basically. Janie had a lot of hats, and without her, she's one of those people that never got the credit she deserved.
I feel like there's a lot of those people within WCW. You know, that we
Yeah,
slowly mention the Zane Breslows of the world, the Janies of the world,
yeah,
maybe even Gary Jesters of the world. But yeah,
yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
underrated people.
yeah. Gary did an amazing job getting some of those towns along with Zane. Zane got most of the country, but Gary we got when we went into New York, he got that building in Nassau. Of course, he had Baltimore, Washington. Gary was actually worked for Walter Mondale as a what do you call them? You don't get paid as a you get
Intern?
an intern. Yeah, so he knew how politics worked, and he knew if he need if he was rejected from a building on the East Coast, we'll say even all the way to the Midwest, he'd go to Mondale and get things done.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Jester's around. I just saw a clip on YouTube. It was funny. It had to be mid 80s. Ole Anderson was going around doing interviews, I guess, for NWA, and it was in Baltimore. So he was interviewing Gary Jester. He couldn't remember his name. And the first time I've ever seen Ole was laughing because he couldn't remember Gary Jester's name. He's like, oh, it's Gary Jester. Oh, it's right, Gary. But it was just funny. Seeing like, wow, Ole's smiling and laughing with Gary Jester. Wow, what is this?
yeah, yeah. It might have been a half-assed rip on Ole's part.
Probably pretending he didn't remember his name or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So as far as the actual pay-per-view, a Spring Stampede 99, let's get started. First match out of the gate. You always say you want to start hot, always want to be a good opener. Juventud Guerrera defeats the new WCW signee Blitzkrieg, who was just awesome in about 11 minutes. This match is awesome. It's surprising because at this point we don't know much about Blitzkrieg. We're like, my God, first of all, Juventud Guerrera is awesome, but Blitzkrieg is amazing.
Yes, yes. Again, that was. I think we got him through Conan some way, and Conan and Kevin had a good relationship also.
Where, as far as like Blitzkrieg, like you get him probably from California, I think. I know they had some sort of trial, but he's probably the California scene is where he comes from.
Yes. Guys that lived in California, besides working independents out there, they would go to Mexico. A lot of them would work in Mexico, especially Tijuana. It's right across the border from San Diego. And that ran every week. So guys got to work with great talent.
Do you think it's ballsy at all to like throw him out there for the first match? Because usually, like you said, first match you want it to be one of the best matches on the card. You want to get the crowd going. He's pretty new to WCW. I mean, this is pretty big time for him to kind of make a big debut like this. Were you nervous at all, like throwing him out there, or you knew he would do it?
No, we had seen him back then, on tapes. We had seen him on tapes, and we knew we weren't getting a pig in a poke. We knew what he could do.
This was like when the cruiserweight division was trying to kind of make a comeback. So Juventud obviously was great. Later on the night, you'll see Kidman and Mysterio have a match, and like obviously they're great. But Blitzkrieg was kind of like that new guy where he was pulling off some moves that you were just like in awe of. You're like, where the hell did this guy? This is amazing, right? I mean, some of the stuff he did, I've never seen before.
And that's something that you just said, John, that's missing in the business. I was talking to Kerry Silkin. You're aware who Kerry Silkin is, right?
Oh yeah, know him very, very well. Kerry's great, yeah.
Yeah. Kerry and I were talking. We said, do you remember in the old days, like if you went to the gardens, they would say, and after a long return, coming 3 weeks in the next garden show, Killer Kowalski is going to be matched against Victor Rivera. It was something new, even though he had gone away. Or we're going to see, they brought, because the Hispanic channel went into New York at the time, and they bring in Chavo, I was supposed to actually work with Ric Flair on a match at the Gardens. It was supposed to be Rick's debut, and I don't know if it was the plane wreck, but he had gotten hurt. He didn't make it. But I mean, guys from Tampa would come up because the Tampa TV played there also. The Funks would come up. The Sheik would come in. I mean, they just had a great relationship, the old man, with all these promoters. And, like Jimmy Cornette said when he was at Mid-South with Watts, Vince would call Bill and say, hey, Bill, what are you doing with Waldo? I would like to get him and start in the territory in about 8 weeks. Of course, he's going to give them to him because he's going to make more money anyway. If Vince calls Waldo direct, he'd give his notice. But that's the class Vince Sr. had. And because of that, Vince Sr. would say, well, I'll tell you what, Bill, I'll give you 3 extra weeks with the Giant. I appreciate what you did. He was a really great businessman. Because here's the thing. All he had to do was call, the guy was going to go. But he had the courtesy to tell Bill he was taking him. And because of that, he got the Giant for another 3 weeks. And the way they used the Giant back then, he was going to sell out, every town that Bill had, because Bill would run them, in New Orleans maybe twice a year and Shreveport once a year. He handled them very well.
Now, the next match up, a bit of a change from the great cruiserweight action. Bam Bigelow defeats Hack with Chastity in about 11 minutes. Great match. Gets a little wild, gets a little hardcore. But this is a kind of a surpriser just because it's like, okay, Sandman, somewhat new, Hack, if you will, somewhat new to WCW. Let's see how this goes. And another great match. Bam Bam is the man.
Yes, he is. And they had great matches in ECW. You know, we talk about people not getting their due. Bam Bam Bigelow is up there of the greatest big men workers of all time. And the other guy that doesn't get his due is Hack. Hack, you knew he had a love for the business. I love giving him finishes because he gets so excited and he wanted to do everything right. And I knew those guys would burn the place down. Kevin did too.
Man, it was kind of surprising because you're like, oh, is this match going to be good? Especially after that opener. You're like, oh, this is going to be a downer. And no, crowd is into it. They're nuts. Both guys are working really hard. And, me being a Bam Bam guy, I just fully invested in Bam Bam at this point. Just absolutely love Bam Bam. Even though a lot of people don't talk about it as a WCW run, I don't know. I'm just such a big fan of him. I really liked it. But I feel like a lot of his energy and so much was taken out from that ECW run because his was epic. His matches in ECW, maybe took a few years off of his career, maybe just because he was doing so much crazy stuff.
I think you hit it right on the nail. You nailed that one because remember they went through the ring. They had a wild style. I mean, they were getting chair shots. Big bumps he would take from the top and miss, which I think I thought about that today. A guy his size, your body can't absorb all those slams and miss moonsaults, and people don't realize the toll it takes on your body. And I think you're right. By this time, Bammer, as great as he was starting to show the injuries a little. And Bam Bam at 50% is better than most guys at 100.
Agreed. And talk to Shane Douglas about it all the time. I interviewed RVD before I talked to him about it. They kind of say Bam Bam helped put them on the map because yes, they were ECW, but you kind of had that huge national star putting those guys over. And I'd love to talk to Taz about it because he really got Taz over. He became a huge star. So think about it. Shane, RVD, Taz all became bigger and better stars after working with Bam Bam.
Exactly. Everybody that worked with Bammer came out of the match, even if they didn't get their hand raised, came out of the match better than they went in. That's what made Bammer such a great, great performer.
How'd you guys get Sandman? Is that Todd Gordon calling you to bring him in, or how does Sandman get to WCW as Hack?
Well, that's his nickname. We couldn't use Sandman. I think most people, ECW fans, knew him as Hack also, because there was a really rabid fan base and they knew everybody's name. So just having Hack and Bammer on the card really meant something because they knew the feud that they had. But how did we get them? It was getting toward the end of ECW's run, and I believe that Bammer called Kevin, and that's how we got him.
As far as the next matchup, we got Scotty Riggs, do a little bit of a different gimmick, a pretty boy gimmick, kind of at this point, defeats somewhat of a more of a newcomer, if you will, Mikey Whipwreck in about 7 minutes. You would think on paper, like, okay, but it's a pretty good match.
Yes, it was. And Mikey, he came from ECW. And again, we were catering to what Paul had built. And Mikey meant something on the card. And I think we tried to squeeze the last bit of juice out of all those guys from ECW. And I think they did a pretty good, damn good job.
Scotty Riggs, to me, doesn't get like as much love. I know he's such a strong performer. He's great in ring, awesome drop kick, but maybe people think of him as the American Males or the guy with the eye patch. But he's one of those guys. He's a great guy to have on your roster.
Solid. That, I mean, he's the kind of guy you didn't have to watch his match because you knew it was going to be terrific. He was, like you said, one of those solid performers. It's funny, we've talked about this before. When tag teams break up, usually one tops the other guy, whether you go back to Jannetty and Shawn Michaels or the Harlem Heat, whoever. One of them goes on and goes higher than the other one. It's funny how that happens.
Yeah. Bagwell, obviously, the American Males, he became the stronger one out of the two with Riggs.
Right. And they were a great tag team. But Scotty Riggs didn't have quite the personality that Buff did. And Buff really got to show his personality when he was a heel.
No doubt about that.
Yeah.
The next match up was kind of a weird setup to it, but Conan defeats Disco Inferno in about 9 minutes. It was kind of set up. Disco was mocking Conan, had a new rap, a new song, a new video, and Disco was basically mocking that, and Conan wanted some revenge. But what did you think about these two?
Well, obviously, they've been friends forever. They do a podcast together, very entertaining. And Disco had a lot more heat than people realize he had. A lot of people think that he was a comical type wrestler. He wasn't. What made him so good, he came out to that dance and all that, but his work was very, very solid. I can't say anything negative about Disco. He worked hard. Every night he worked hard. He never took a night off. And with Conan, we don't understand how big a star Conan was. He was the Hulk Hogan of Mexico. And then when he came to the United States, he was a big influence for me when I saw, when I told you we were in Denver and I saw all the Mexican flags and Conan shirts in the audience. And some of those shirts weren't ours. They were from Mexico. And I was saying, wow, this guy. And I had been on tours with him overseas. I was with him in the Philippines, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore. So I got to see him work quite a bit. He was really, and he was much bigger than physically than any Mexican wrestler I had seen, except with the exception maybe of Mil Mascaras.
Now, we love Conan on this show. We have a whole show dedicated. If you want to go back in the archives, Conan and the Luchadors get a lot of love. As far as Disco Inferno, did you have any other bigger plans for him, booking wise? Like, could you think he could have been more top of the card than he was used?
Yes, except there was that glass ceiling, we talked about. You have Hogan, you have Kevin, you have Scott, you have Sting, you have Flair, you have the Steiners, you have Harlem Heat, you have some great technical wrestlers that were going to steal the show. Could he have fit there? Yes. He would eventually, if the company had stayed in one piece, he would eventually moved up the card. And I think he would have fit in very well as like the U.S. champion.
When does he move to part of the booking committee? Because I know he'd become part of creative in the future.
He moved in when Russo came back.
Okay. So Conan wins that match, about 9 minutes or so. The next match, Rey Mysterio Jr., the defending champion, defeats Billy Kidman for the Cruiserweight Championship. He defends it. He obviously retains it in about 15 minutes. This is another match which is like, wow, this is great. It might even be better than the opener. I mean, this was a great match here with Mysterio and Kidman.
Billy Kidman was a great performer. And with Rey Mysterio, they did some stuff that was unbelievable. And I'm with you on this one. As good as the opening match was, it's hard to beat a Rey Mysterio match.
Even in 99, he's still, I mean, even 2021, he's still great, but 99 still dominating the Cruiserweight division, about 3 years after he really made his mark on the Cruiserweight division, 96. But it's great to kind of see. Did you want him moving further up the card past Cruiserweight, or is that another one of those glass ceiling kind of things?
Well, you got to remember, we still had a lot of giants in there, even though I know Ray beat Scott Hall on TV one time, and I even think he beat Kevin. That's what they thought of Ray, those two guys. But it was still a big man's territory, so Ray was not going to wrestle Hogan. And in hindsight, that would have drawn a lot of money. But again, I think that Hulk had this thing that he liked to work with guys that were giants. He wanted to beat giants. And it's unfortunate that Ray didn't get the push that in WCW that WWF gave him in WWE.
For sure. Former world champion and WWE world champion. So quite a run.
Yeah.
The next matchup, Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko with Arn Anderson defeat Perry Saturn and Raven in about 14 minutes. Again, gotta say it again, another good match. It just high quality pay-per-view match wise.
Oh, you're talking about some of the best technical wrestlers of all times. And how this is where I got to give hats off to Kevin. That was Kevin's idea because Kevin knew how to place matches very well. That was one of Kevin's strong suits as a booker. And that's why I said if Kevin had stayed the course of being a booker, there's no telling what Kevin would have done.
Man, just Malenko, Benoit, great. Raven and Saturn are great. And then you just put those guys together, trying to rebuild the tag team division a little here because tag team division went away for a little bit in WCW where it wasn't really a focal point at all.
Yeah, yeah. And we're kind of doing that follow the leader stuff, even though we were doing well. That was the end of really the tag team eras because I don't think one of the big things at one time when territories were there was, if we'll say hypothetically, it was if you were in San Francisco, they used the U.S. belt out there. So the U.S. belt was on top. Then they had their own version of the World Tag Team Champions. They were second, semifinal. Then they'd have a guy going to wrestle on the third match that was going to win to challenge the U.S. challenger. And earlier in the night, they'd have a tag team go over to wrestle the U.S. World Tag Team Champions on the next show, the Cow Palace. sort of like Vince Sr. did and Eddie
Mhm.
Graham did.
Now, as far as the next match, Scotty Steiner defeats Booker T for the vacant WCW United States Championship match. This match goes about 15 minutes. Another good match. Scott Steiner seemed a bit healthier at this point. We've been talking to some previous shows in '98 and stuff where Steiner wasn't very healthy or was injured. So this was good to see a healthier Scotty Steiner, and obviously Booker T, one of the best.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look at how far Booker T has come in his career. And the other thing is, his brother was terrific. I don't understand. I know he had a lot of, he has a music company and a production company. He's done very well for himself, but he could have really drawn some money. I think with either one of them could have drawn some money with Hogan.
Scotty Steiner, man, if he doesn't have the best body ever in wrestling, it's up there. Warrior, Luger, Kerry Von Erich. I mean, it's up there. He just looks. He walks in a room like, who is this guy? Like, this guy is a superstar.
Yeah, you got it right. Superstar Billy Graham started that trend, and I think it's funny that now WWE, the guys aren't wrestlers; they're superstars. So it's a ripoff of Superstar Billy Graham.
True.
Yeah.
And Scotty Steiner, being the U.S. champ here, would eventually, down the road, become the world champion, have a nice little run. But did you at this point think like, okay, I'm gearing him, I'm going to give him a big push?
Kevin was, yeah. I thought he was doing the right thing too. I mean, Scott Steiner, we talked about posters. Can you see a poster of Steiner face to face with Goldberg or Steiner face to face with Sting? I mean, that just to me is money.
Totally agree. Love Scotty Steiner. The Big Papa Pub character is main event, big time. It's just awesome character. His promos can get a little crazy, but they were great because it was authentic and it was real.
Right. And people loved his interviews because they're so different than anybody else's.
100%. The next matchup, Bill Goldberg defeats Kevin Nash, who was with Lex Luger and Miss Elizabeth, in about 8 minutes. Interesting to note here, this is 4 months after the streak has ended. Goldberg finally gets the chance to avenge that big loss at Starrcade 98 to Kevin Nash.
Yeah. And who went over in that match? Remind me.
Goldberg beat Nash.
So the guy that broke the streak, who lost the belt the next night on TV, now does the job for Goldberg. Something doesn't smell right in Denmark. You know what I'm saying?
What do you mean?
Do you remember at this period what Kevin Nash looked like?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the monster.
Do you think maybe Hogan didn't want to be matched up with Kevin in the ring?
Possible. Would have been another monster to slay if he was going to get the win, of course.
Yeah. Well, that's where I'm going. If he beat Goldberg, if he was the one that decided that he beat Goldberg, and then he dropped it the next night, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
Unless he was instructed to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So they're really kind of rebuilding up, or you're rebuilding up Goldberg, because he's going to get this big win. He's going to get a win back against Nash, right? Going to rebuild him?
That wasn't me doing that. That was Kevin Nash doing that. That was Kevin Nash's finish. That was Kevin doing the right thing.
Do you think that Goldberg wanted that win back, or is that he didn't think in those terms?
I'm sure he wanted that win back, but it wasn't like other people that had to have the win back. I wanted Kevin to lose, but Bill to lose cleanly. I think I've told you this. My finish was he turnbuckles Kevin, he goes for the big spear. Kevin moves out of the way. Bill hits the post. He comes out. Kevin gives him a big boot and does something, drops something on him. 1, 2, 3. They could have had 3. This could have been the blow-off match. This could have been the 3rd match. We could have had a wild second match that there was no clear finish. And then we'd have the clean finish that we did, Goldberg and Kevin did.
Imagine the poster, too.
Yeah. And if Kevin put Bill over there, I don't think he had any reason to do the finish they did, except trying to save Bill, which I pleaded against it, but I was overruled. And I've heard people say, well, you can't have a clean finish all the time. Yeah. Did you watch the Super Bowl?
Right.
They had a clean finish. This was our Super Bowl. To me, I always looked at pay-per-views as like Super Bowls. You got to have a winner, especially on the top of the card. You can get away with it occasionally, but not a match of this magnitude.
So Goldberg gets the win, gets his win back. Then we go to the main event of the evening. Diamond Dallas Page defeats Ric Flair, who went into the match as champion Hollywood Hulk Hogan and staying in a 4 corners match for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. And like we mentioned before, Randy Savage is a special guest referee. Match goes about 17 minutes and 30 seconds. What do you think here? DDP gets the big win.
I think that this was pressure from above. Everybody had done the job for Dallas. Now the pressure's on Flair, Sting, and Hogan to do the right thing. And they did it.
You think this is like a year late, though? Because at this point, DDP is a heel. He could have been champ as a babyface when he was super hot in '98.
Yeah. I thought, again, I saw Page as Dusty Rhodes. He was the blue collar champion. He was the everyman's champion, like Dusty was. He was as The Rock used to say, he was the people's champion. And I think it should have been done when he was a babyface, yes.
So he finally gets the win. Hogan gets taken out. The crowd is really into it. Kind of dissipated a little bit, but Hogan gets taken out with injury. Was that his idea to kind of stay strong, to sell the injury angle, and get him eliminated from the match so DDP can get the win?
I wasn't involved in that finish. I'm sure Kevin sat down and with Hulk, and Hulk came up with that idea.
With DDP winning as a heel, did you think like, okay, this is a guy we're going to go with, or was he just going to be a transitional champ?
I thought this was coming close to Kevin's last run. I think Kevin was going to go with Page for a while. But like everything else in life, things change.
Yep. Savage drops the elbow on Flair, helps DDP get the win here. A little bit of a tease, and Savage kind of saying, "You owe me one." There
Right.
was that almost like a little nod to their feud that they had, the epic feud '97.
Yeah, absolutely. It was homage to that feud. Yeah.
What do you think about Savage at this point? I mean, he was ripped, he was shredded, he was huge at this point.
I'll tell you a story. Randy had taken time off to do the movie Spider-Man.
Yep.
And I went to Tampa for a month. I was having some work done at my place in the Keys. And I rented a place for a month on the beach. And Randy said, hey, I live down the street. I'm by the pool. Come see me. We'll go work out. Well, I see this guy with a black hat on, with black dark hair in a ponytail. And I said, who is that monster? And turned around, and it was Randy. I couldn't believe how big he was. He was a giant. His arms were huge. I mean, he looked fabulous.
For that Bonesaw character too, he looked great, and that's and
Yeah.
Spider-Man, he was great in Spider-Man. He quite a character.
Mm-hmm. He was Randy. I don't know if I've told you this story. Do you know Randy played baseball in the minor leagues for the Cincinnati Reds? Did you know that?
Yep.
And you know about him breaking his arm? He was a catcher.
Yes. Yep.
Every morning he got up, he threw 10,000 balls against a wall every day till he learned how to throw left-handed, and he became a left-handed throwing first baseman.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
The dedication that would be, involved with that is just crazy. He is definitely a nut.
Yeah, it's like his father had the world's sit-up record for years. 6,666.33 was, so it was 6,033 sit-ups with nonstop.
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah.
Need some dedication and do stuff like that.
Yeah.
But as far as Spring Stampede 99, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle, what do you got?
Thumbs up. Definitely thumbs up.
I agree. Going back and watching, I can't think of a bad match. Goldberg Nash, I liked. The main event, I liked. I thought it was very good. Maybe a shocking finish at that point when, in '99 when you're watching, maybe a shocker, but it was pretty good to see DDP finally win the title. Conan Disco was good. The tag match with Benoit Malenko, of course, was good. Steiner and Booker T was good. Bam Bam Hack was good. Riggs and Whipwreck was even pretty good. Hoovy Blitzkrieg was great. Mysterio Kidman, maybe match of the night.
Yeah, I think thumbs up to the whole show.
Loved it. This, and like a lot of the critics said, they loved this show. This was the last great quote unquote WCW pay-per-view.
Well, and that was Kevin's pay-per-view, the guy they slaughtered.
Yep. Very true. And now let's get to the plugs.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
John.
Yep, I got you.
John.
Yep. Now let's get to the plugs. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Check out the website, tmptempire.com. Go to Kevin Sullivan's store, prowrestlingtees.com, and check out Kevin Sullivan. Go to doublehell.com for some awesome array of Kevin Sullivan t-shirts. Also, go to Instagram, Taskmaster Talks, and follow Kevin on there. And go to my Patreon, patreon.com/TMPT Empire for more. Of course, everything and everything really for anything and everything for 2Man Power Trip. Go to at 2Man Power Trip on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. We'll see you right back here next week on Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. See you next week, folks.